Hello, hello, hello. Apologies. I literally got distracted by a feature I just found on my MacBook, which does some cool stuff. It creates like a ring-like effect on my screen because it saw that I am streaming, which is quite cool. Well, anyway, that's a distraction, obviously. Day 24. Day 24. We are over 3 weeks into the new year and into a daily habit of reading. So let's go. We ended yesterday with Dinah's really tragic and unfortunate defilement at the hands of Shechem, and we saw Jacob's son's response to that, which was brutal, absolutely brutal. They killed every man in the town and looted it. And it was even two brothers that did that, but the rest of the brothers came and they looted it after the fact. Um, and I bring that up because we're going to see something of that temperament, something of that nature um, today. And so uh, in, in Genesis 35, um, Jacob is leaving. He's right. He's not, I guess, fleeing, but he's leaving that area because and if you remember, and I'll just bring up Jacob's response because I think it's quite telling. He he uh, he laments what they've done. Let me bring it up here because it's just a little bit easier to have both scriptures in front of me. So in Genesis 34, you know, Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, "You have ruined me. You've made me stink among all the people of this land, among all the Canaanites and Perizzites. We are so few that they will join forces and crush us. I'll be wiped out, and my entire household will be wiped out." And his reaction is as such because, despite being somewhat justified in their anger and in their rage at the very least of what was done to their sister, um, they've killed all the men in the town. All the men in the town they slaughtered, um, and so you can imagine the people around them were looking at Jacob and his family like, oh, these are a dangerous people. These are the same um, that killed everyone here. Let's join forces. Let's nip this in the bud. Let's destroy them before they get the same idea about us. So he was understandably um, quite worried by their actions, and so God literally says to him, "Move to Bethel." So he's leaving the place, and God has come, and God's taken him to in another place where he will be safe. Um, and oh, Pastor Lyra's got a good question. Why was Diana on her own in the first place? Was it because she was spoilt, being the only girl in the family of men? Hmm. It's a very, very good question, especially as in that time you can imagine she would know. They lived in. They were a nomadic sort of people, and they lived in a time where she probably shouldn't have. I'm just going to grab, uh, going back to, um, yes. So in Genesis 34, it says Dinah, the daughter of Jacob and Leah, went to visit some of the young women who lived in the area. So she'd gone to visit some other women, but then the local prince saw her and grabbed her. So, yeah, yeah. There is, I guess, a note to being sensible and not putting yourself in danger. Um, but yeah, it's a good question. But yeah, so with that in the background, Jacob is now moving from where he was and where his sons have killed everyone to a new place that God was going to show him. Well, it was telling him to go back to where he had met him before, back at Bethel. So Jacob was going, but then God comes again and, sort of reconfirms the promise to give Jacob the land and to make him, a man of many nations. And again, I think the thing that stands out to me here is Jacob isn't just inheriting, the promise of his father, of his grandfather. He's not just sort of inheriting what was promised to them. He's having his own interactions with God, and God is re-establishing the covenant, this time with Jacob. He did it with Abraham, he did it with Isaac, and this time with Jacob. He's come again and on a personal basis is establishing, this is my covenant with you. I will give you the land as I promised, to Abraham and to Isaac. I'm going to give it to you, and out of you will come kings and many nations, and it's a significant thing, and it speaks the character of God, that God isn't just the God of, your parents, etc. And just bringing it into today's age, my mum and dad being Christian, God is their God, but then He also wants and desires a relationship with me, and you might have been born in a Christian home, or might have Christian parents, but you don't. And as much as you inherit a lot of your values, and you know, good parents will always give you the best of them. Um, God also wants a relationship with you individually. And Pastor Lyles put it perfectly, is that even despite our failings, God still wants a relationship with us. And that we've seen Abraham, Isaac, Jacob all had their failings. Jacob was a bit manipulating. Um, Isaac and Abraham, both lied about their wives out of fear. And yet God still desires relationship with us, which is incredible and a privilege that we shouldn't take for granted. Um, as they're leaving Bethel, Rachel goes into labor and unfortunately dies, and she has her last son, and these then form the 12 sons of Jacob. Um, and we see, the breakdown. Leah has Jacob's oldest, Reuben, Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. And then Rachel has Joseph and Benjamin, um, which are become important in both in what they represent, but then in what happens after the fact. But Bilhah, which was Rachel's servant, had Dan and Naphtali, and Zilpah had uh, Gad and Asher, who was Leah's servant, was Zilpah. And so Rachel unfortunately dies, and we meet um, Jacob's 12 sons now, which ultimately becomes the 12 tribes of Israel. As we know, yesterday, Jacob also Jacob's name was also changed into Israel, and thus the 12 tribes of Israel. It's really the 12 tribes of Jacob. I can't speak. Um, After that, Isaac dies. Isaac dies at 180, and Esau and Jacob, they bury him. And so we go to chapter 36, and we have a record of Esau's family, and his wives and their children. And 36 is a very long sort of genealogy of all of the people of Esau. And I'll admit it was hard to read sometimes. The names are in and of themselves are interesting, but what's important is you will. I think it's important to read and not just skip over, because we start to see certain things, like there are people like uh I saw one person's name. I did sort of just sort of endured it and read through. But the point is, yeah, Amalek, we start to see Korah, we see Amalek, and these presently don't hold much, but they later on, when you start to meet the Amalekites or the Korahites, you can trace them back to now. And what we do see is a lot of the surrounding um, tribes and peoples actually had relationships or are like distant cousins of Israel that still have interactions with them, which is of interest, I think. Um, the other thing I was going to say as well was when Rachel was buried, the writer says, Jacob puts up a marker on her grave, and the writer says that marker is the same that's still here today. And I think it's worth noting that Genesis, when it was written, was contemporary to the times. The people that were that wrote this down, and this was attributed to Moses. When Moses was writing this down, however many hundreds of years after the fact, he was writing about things that they could still see. They could still see evidence of, oh, that's where Rachel is buried. Oh, that's the cave in which Abraham and Sarah were buried. They weren't just writing sort of myths and legends of their people, because a lot of this was oral tradition before it was written down. But it was oral tradition that was contemporary to what was going on. Like they literally knew the location of where Abraham and Sarah were buried. They would literally know where this well that Isaac dug up would be, or this marker for Rachel's burial ground. Like the same marker is still there today. I think that's worth noting because a common argument is how Genesis is just stories and stories passed down and that had been changed and mutilated or evolved through time. And of course, there will be some level of um, with any sort of oral tradition, some level of change with language, with transmission. What I think we fail to realize is, on the one hand, these are contemporaries of what's going on, that they can still see the things we refer to. And on the other hand, they took great care, very, very great care in writing these things down. Um, they were very careful to handle what they were writing down, and so it was sacred because it very much was to them. Um, and they'd have scribes and schools of people be meticulous in what they're writing down, even so as to, if they were to make a mistake, as opposed to just blotting it out. Because again, remember, they were writing these things on. They didn't have the ease of a word processor where you can just delete, or pencil and pen where you can erase. They would strike it, make a mark to say there's an error here, and they write the correct thing, and document those things. So they were super careful, and that was sort of commonplace to be super careful about these sort of things. But anyway, that's by the by. Um, but Pastor Lyles pointed out that yes, the names were hard. But we also learned that the Chiefs started with the Chiefs of Esau. Um, and it's important, some of these details. It's facts that you pick up from later on that become um quite interesting and quite useful. Um, and it's also interesting, yes, that Rachel wasn't buried in the tomb Abraham built, but Leah was. Um, and these are interesting things that's worth being mindful of. Yeah, we in 36 we go through Esau's descendants and the people of Edom, the rulers, the chiefs, as Pastor Lyle pointed out, and 36 is pretty much dedicated to all of that. But in 37, we come to maybe a more popular note, I think stories that we know of, Joseph's dreams. But before that, I think it's, again, I want to point out Joseph's brothers, and um, it was just Simeon and Levi who were dying as full brothers, but all of them, after Simeon and Levi had slaughtered the men, went and looted the area. So they are people capable of much violence, capable of killing other people. Um, and not to trivialize it, but it's worth noting because in once we start to meet Joseph the dreamer. He talks about um the first in 37, chapter 37 verse 2. It says Joseph was 17 when he was working with his half brothers, and he took a report to his father of some of the bad things that they were doing. And I think that sets the scene, right? Joseph is teacher's pet. Not to say it's bad or good, but he was the teacher's pet. He was definitely Jacob's favorite. On the one hand, because he was Rachel's first, he was born to Jacob in his old age. And Rachel was the one that Jacob actually loved. So much so that God restricted Rachel from giving birth because Jacob loved her so much more than he loved Leah. And so this is the sort of situation that where Joseph is in, and the sort of character that Joseph is showing, which is he very much was always ready to go and then sort of rat on his brothers, or he was a favorite, and he clearly knew it. When he starts having these dreams, he tells his brothers, and so first dream he had was about him. Tying up bundles of grain, and then his bundles stand and their bundles bow down before his. And the brother's like, "So do you think you'll be our king? Do you think you'll reign over us?" Now, we know later on, these dreams actually come true and what Joseph was to do. And again, interestingly, God uses what, he uses these dreams are prophetic, right, of what Joseph is going to do. But the response of his brothers and the nature of his brothers that we have seen. So his response of the brothers is, "What, you're going to rule over us? You're really going to be our king?" And they hated him. They were jealous of him, you know. Um, but that response, we can understand. Oh, that's teacher's pet. That's daddy's favorite. We're not really that favorited. We're not really that, we're loved, but we're not Joseph, so they don't like him. When they eventually then decide that they are going to kill him, it's it's brutal, but it's also consistent with who they are, who they've shown themselves to be. They are people capable of very, very brutal violence. So it's consistent with who they've shown themselves to be. But then God uses that to get Joseph to where he needs to be. And ultimately Joseph then, says a famous line, "What you intended for evil, God has used for good." But I find it very interesting when God, who knows the end from the beginning, demonstrates as such, but we can see how we play ourselves into the same role. Like God didn't force anyone to do anything, right? As their temperaments, that meant daddy's favorite, they were willing to even kill, and luckily he got sold. But all of that was actually part of the plan, and it shows how much God is in control in some of these things. Yeah. Mom's pointing out Joseph was a teenager and didn't have much sense or wisdom in how to say such things to his family. Like, you have a dream that your brothers are bowing to you. You keep that to yourself. That's the wise thing to do, you know. But he then even has a dream of, the sun and the moon and the stars bowing to him, which would imply his father and his mother would bow to him as well. And he again foolishly tells them all of that. He just says it out. There's an innocence to that. There's a naivety to that. Um, but yes, he tells his brothers and his parents all of his dreams, and they're very jealous of him. And actually, in verse 8 of chapter 37, it says they hated him all the more because of his dreams and how he talked about them. And then we get, Jacob making this coat for Joseph, this coat of many colors. Um, it's a coat that's significant in that through that quote, they are able to convince their dad that Joseph has actually died. So Joseph having telling them these stories, there's one day where Joseph is sent to go check on his brothers and come and give a report. As he's coming, the brothers decide they plot to kill him. They're going to kill him and tell their dad that some wild animal has eaten him. Um, But Reuben actually hears that, and he secretly tells them, well, not secretly, he deceptively tells them, don't kill him, let's throw him into a well. Um, then he'll die without us having actually killed him. But then he was planning to go and then save Joseph and take him back to his dad, which is noble, you know. But also shows Reuben understands his brothers. He didn't outright just say, let's not kill them, let's not kill Joseph. He said, oh, let's not, have his blood on our hands. Let's throw him into a well. He'll die of thirst and hunger in there, with a plan to go and pick him up. But again, it shows that he was aware of the violence that they are capable of. And having done that, having thrown him into that well, um, they were just casually eating and see that there's some traders coming and decide killing him is we don't gain much by that. Why not sell him, get some money, and then at least, again, his blood is not on our hands. So Reuben goes back and finds that they've actually sold him. And Reuben demonstrates that he did intend to get Joseph out because he's stricken with grief at the realization that Joseph has been sold. And so they do, grab his coat that's so recognizable, rip it to pieces, and dip it in blood, and they tell their father that Joseph has been killed, and their father mourns him. You know, that's his favorite son. Mourns him, even says that he will die mourning for his son. And we learn that Joseph is ultimately sold to an officer of Pharaoh, um, Potiphar, and that's where we leave Joseph in 37, chapter 37. And so we are going to see the saga of Joseph again, his life and his decisions and his actions leading to ultimately he get into the position where his dreams are actually come true. But it's interesting to see how God achieves that, how God brings those dreams to fruition, not even through directly orchestrating it, but through the very behavior and temperament of his brothers. Um, so that's where we leave it. Um, Tomorrow's reading will be chapter 38 to 40 of Genesis. And again, if you've been reading with us so far, we are 79 chapters into the Bible, which is great. Apparently that's 6.64% of the Bible we've read before the end of January. And I do hope that this is encouraging to you guys. I'm definitely encouraged, even from Pastor Lai or Pastor Emmanuel, giving me a jumping on and giving commenting. It's always encouraging and encouraging me outside of this as well. Um, it's been good. It's been a blessing to be able to read and consistently keep up with this every day and share some thoughts on it. So I hope that encourages you to do the same. And so whenever you read, if you're watching this, whenever you do, thank you for joining me. And I hope that you benefit from it. And I hope that you pick up the word and spend some time with God today. Otherwise, see you tomorrow. All right. Peace out. Thank you, man. Thank you, Dad.